Morning, guys. How are we doing today? Today we're discussing Sonny Stitt, a guy who I think is a very underappreciated guy in modern jazz. He's got some deep roots and a long discography, and we're going to kind of skip through some things and talk about him. But first I want to give you a little information on the guy. We talk a lot about how personality inflects on a player, and their experience and their environment are part of what colors their information that they speak to us. He was born Edward Hammond Boatner in Boston, Mass. in 1924 to a very musical family. I guess his father, his mother, was just a tradition of great musicians, and he was given up for adoption right almost immediately, like same year, from what I can tell. And he was moved to Saginaw, Michigan, where he became a Stitt. And he learned music and was being successful in school, joining bands and stuff. And I feel like the young man had a lot to prove. He was trying to live up to his genes. At the same time, there was probably an instinct in him that wanted to kind of run and be the lone wolf as he became known. I'm guessing some of his experience as a young guy is what fuels some of his behaviors as a grown man, and what informed his alcoholism and his addiction. And it's just important to have some background on a guy being adopted at a young age as a black man, as a white kid. It's you know, it can have various results, obviously, but I think it's still going to, on some level, impact your expressions and feelings towards the world. And maybe it was one of the reasons why he never really had a working band. He was just kind of like, you know what? I don't trust. I don't want to share the revenues I bring in. And when he went from town to town, he would just find local guys to play. And that's what's beautiful about jazz, is that's a very doable thing. You couldn't do that in a lot of other formats. Only the blues and jazz really can you show up and say, you guys get up here and play with me. You know, Stitt meets Parker in '43, and Parker was known to have said, "You sound like me." And of course, everybody who played the alto at that point sounded like Parker on some level. Kenny Clark once said, even without Parker, there would have been a Sonny Stitt. And Stitt does have his own identity, as he is as much a virtuoso as any of the bebop guys. And I think some of his dynamic, flashy playing is the expression of a kid that was adopted and moved around, and just his life experience. He joined Billy Eckstein's band in the 40s and ends up playing with Gene Ammons, who he has a lifelong interaction with in the business, where they make records together, play together. They're one of the great cutting guys. These two guys would get on stage and just battle, along with Al Cohn and who am I thinking of? It was the Sims, sorry. And of course, Lockjaw Griff. Ammons and Stitt was a great show. If you saw those guys, you were going to really enjoy yourself. And Stitt in 1960 actually joins Miles Davis for a brief moment. And Miles was known to have said he drank too much. He let him go. And part of why he was drinking a lot was he was trying to stay off the heroin, which is no easy taskmaster. Anyway, let's dig into his discography. He played with a lot of different labels over the years. And I'm going to break it down for you by label, even though there is some overlapping. Often when a guy leaves from Prestige and goes to Roost, Prestige still has stuff in the vaults that they're going to be issuing over the next few years. And so it feels like, oh, they're still on both these labels, but usually it's like he was here, recorded, moved here, and this other label was still putting stuff out. And the jazz musicians rarely recorded a great percentage of their music. You know, very few guys came out of this with millions of dollars, that's for sure. But a lot of his early recordings end up being at Prestige as a leader. And this record, which is 70-24, pretty early in the Prestige discography, 70, 77, Kaleidoscope, And again, these are both recordings that predate the LP era. So the early 7000 series with Prestige, a lot of it comes from the early 50s, sometimes even the late 40s from the 78-inch era. So this is early Stitt. And you can hear some of the Parker here. You can hear the fire of the bebop, and a guy that could play and really was trying to prove himself. And you feel like Stitt on some level was a bit of a loner and just kind of a hurting guy. And I think that's why he plays the way he does. So Stitt has another record here, 7133, Stitt's Bits, and this is also early stuff. So even 133 releases in to the Prestige 7000 series, they're still putting out earlier stuff onto the LP, which it's akin to like when the CD age happened. They keep going back and reissuing old stock of stuff that artists already had released, and so it's not really any different than that. But it still is good to understand timeline. So this is also before 55, the LP era. It's a great cover though. One of my favorite Prestige album covers, actually. That one took me a while to find. I think I actually found it from Sweden, believe it or not. So after his stay at Prestige, he moves on to the Roost label. And he's at Roost probably 53 or so, 54. You got some stuff with not Johnny Griffin, with Lockjaw Davis here. I've been wanting to do this series for a while, and I kept trying to get his other Roost 10-inch where he plays Johnny Richards, and it just kept eluding me. Either people wanted too much for, or it was just unplayable. And then this whole virus thing happened, and I'm not buying records right now, so I said whatever. But there is another 10-inch from this era that is on the Roost label, and he records prolifically for the Roost label. And what's in reality probably only about 4 years ends up being about a dozen records at least. This is Sonny Stitt with Eddie Davis, and it's number 1203, which ends up not being the sequence. They end up going to 2200, and I'll show you that in a second here. Here is Sonny Stitt plays arrangements from the pen of Quincy Jones. And so Quincy Jones is just kind of arriving on the scene as a young guy. And an older guy like Sonny Stitt thinks so highly of young Quincy Jones that he immediately says, let's have you arrange a session for me. So that says a lot about Quincy Jones as a young man, because this is 1955, so his first solo record is just coming out, Quincy. But the Roost album covers are beautiful. The music sounds great. Sonny Stitt is as beautiful playing ballads as he is at playing fiery bebop and hard bop. He doesn't have a working group really at any point. He doesn't have much of a kinship with even guys he played with consistently. Even Gene Ammons, it was sporadic over the years, and it was always great. But it's interesting seeing how different his bands can be. Oh, this is a great album cover. This is just called Sonny Stitt, Sonny Stitt, Sonny Stitt. It's got that smoky vibe. This is number 2208. Another great Roost album cover, 2219, 37 minutes and 48 seconds with Sonny Stitt. And a lot of his Roost stuff is just beautiful. And I'm gonna let you in on a little secret. You can get Sonny Stitt Roost records for 15, 20, 30 bucks. And what a great value. They're beautiful album covers. He's a fantastic player. He's emoting very much from the cuff. It never seems too pre-packaged or meditated. It just seems like I'm going to show up and loosely throw out whatever comes to mind. And that was his freedom. That was his liberty, just to kind of shoot from the hip. And I think also the lone wolf thing is when you don't have a consistent piece of people, bandmates to play with, some of the cliches you fall into, some of the expectations that start to happen, some of the demands of what we're going to play, all of it becomes your choice. And again, how much of this leads back to being left for adoption at a young age, abandoned by his musical genetic parents and brought up in Michigan. And I don't know what his home life was like on either stage, but I'm just saying that at some level, that rejection, that move, that instability, that self-doubt, I think is a lot of what fuels his lone wolf mentality. This is Sonny Stitt with the New Yorkers. This is a great record. It's the members were Shadow Wilson, Hank Jones, Wendell Marshall, and Jerome Richardson. This was recorded live. Roost number 2226. For those of you who have watched my Roost label, Dozen Records I Love, Roost only has about 50 titles. And so for a guy like Sonny Stitt to have so many titles in there, the saxophones of Sonny Stitt. Beautiful record cover, number 2230. Another great record cover, a little bit of Stitt. Roost 2235. The Sunny Side of Stitt. Another great album cover. And it's probably about this time of 2240 where 1957, 1958, we're getting towards that, where he makes the move over to Verve. Here's Sonny Stitt, Stittsville. Another fantastic Roost session. 2244. So you can see that a lot of the Roost discography is Sonny Stitt. And if you add the Johnny Smith records to the Sonny Stitt records, you probably have at least half of the classic Roost releases from 54 through 59, 60 when they sold to Roulette. This is Sunny Side Up, another fantastic album cover. I don't think that's Reed Miles, but it has a certain Reed Miles design flair to it. It certainly fits in with some of the Reed Miles artwork from that period. This is Sonny Stitt Feelings, number 2247. And I honestly can't say there's a bad record in this bunch. They all contain some blues. They all contain a ballad where he's a great player. And they all have some up-tempo clicking. Stitt in Orbit. And by this time, he's definitely already moved on to Verve, because some of the stuff's starting to come out now in 59, 60, 61. There's another one after this I don't have. Stitt Goes Latin. It's got kind of a corny cover, which I think it's actually well after the Roulette purchase. Roost. Roulette continued to add titles kind of to the Roost discography that were Roost artists, but they weren't Roost releases, or sometimes even Roost sessions. But that moves us to Verve. And starting at 8219, which probably puts us about 1957, because they started 8,000 like in 80, I mean it's in 54, 55. And so here we are 219 records in to the Verve discography. And Verve, when they first launched, they are putting out a lot of albums in their early 8,000, 8,100 series, is because they had such a backlog in Clef and Norgran that they wanted us to keep issuing that stuff and getting out there on the Verve LPs. So it comes out pretty thick and pretty heavy. And so by 57, could Verve have 219 releases? Yeah. It was that prolific. And they were saturating a national market with Verve. And Norman Granz brings Sonny Stitt into the fold. And his late 50s, early 60s Verve stuff is outstanding. This is the New York Jazz, the Sonny Stitt Quartet. Even at Verve, he plays a lot of different people. He plays with Ray Brown a lot, which he does here, Joe Jones and Jimmy Jones. He ends up playing with the Oscar Peterson group some. A fantastic record here is Sonny Stitt, Only the Blues. And boy, this is just a great record. And it's a clear-cut example of some of the finer artwork in the Verve catalog. That's just great stuff. This is with Roy Eldridge, Oscar Peterson, Herb Ellis, Ray Brown, Stan Levy. So you got pretty much the Oscar Peterson trio in there with Stan Levy on drums and Roy Eldridge and Sonny Stitt. So it's just a great session. Great rhythm section. You had Stan Levy on the drums, and you have Roy Eldridge and Sonny Stitt flying around playing solos. Forget about it. That's jazz royalty, guys. Ray Brown, Herb Ellis. It's just Oscar Peterson. Forget about it. These are some of the most talented guys in jazz. And we all love the young kids at Blue Note and Riverside and the modern that's happening there. But these guys are still playing some incredible liquid gold. Norman Granz has most of the legends in the fold. And they can really put together one heck of a session. Sunny Side Up with Dizzy Gillespie, Sonny Rollins, and Sonny Stitt. And if I recall, this record has a couple different issuings. This is 8262. Another legendary album cover and a great record is Sonny Stitt, The Hard Swing. And again, the classic Verve black logos. Verve does a pretty good job of keeping most of their titles around for some time. This last two showed the band real nice and easily. I don't see it as quickly as this one. So, but anyway, if you see The Hard Swing, grab it. Some of these Verve records will go for a little more than the Roost ones, but Sonny Stitt records are still a steal. They're like a secret that people don't know about. You know, it's Parker playing into a later stage of his career, seeing the developments in the music and adjusting, and yet as the older he got, the more he defined his own sound. He kind of moves to the tenor predominantly, and on the tenor, his sound became very much Sonny Stitt. This plays Jimmy Joffrey. Jimmy was making some inroads on the West Coast with his sounds and his arrangements, and so here's Sonny Stitt embracing Jimmy Joffrey's arrangements. And this has Sonny Stitt, Jack Sheldon, Lee Katzman, Frank Rosolino, Al Paulin, Jimmy Rawls, Buddy Clark, and Lawrence Marble. And what you're seeing there is that this is obviously a lot of West Coast guys playing Jimmy Joffrey's sound. This is 8324, Personal Appearance. Another fine Sonny Stitt record. This has Stitt, Edgar Willis, Kenny Dennis, and Bobby Timmons as a young man. We're probably 59-60 now. And here is Sonny Stitt with the Oscar Peterson trio. And this is as good a place to start with Sonny Stitt as there is. Because A, you got the Oscar Peterson trio, which, seriously people, you know what I mean? It doesn't get better than those cats. And then Sonny is just filling in the valleys and the hills in between those guys' grooves. And beautiful album cover. Verve doing some of its finest work here in the late 50s. Another legendary Stitt Verve record is Sonny Stitt Blows the Blues. See what I'm saying? Sonny Stitt blows the blues. And I don't think it was very tough for him to express within the framework of the blues. I think the guy had a lot on his mind. And Saxophone Supremacy, the Sonny Stitt Quartet, number 8377. So we're getting closer to the Creed Taylor coming over to Verve. And nice album cover. 8380. Sonny Stitt swings the most. See if we can see the group on this one. It's not air apparent, so we'll move on. I do have a missing one Verve record that I bought and got lost in the mail, and I haven't bothered to buy it again, hoping it would show up. It's a record he does with Stan Getz earlier on for musicians only. Fucking mail. But I've bought thousands of records on the mail, so I think it's the first one I've never gotten, even down the road. So you can see as impressive as his Roost discography was in the mid-50s, what he's doing here at Verve in the late 50s is fantastic work. This is the Boss Tenors with Gene Ammons and Sonny Stitt from 84-26. And this is a period where they do a couple of records together. I'll give you a little tidbit of that here. When you hear these two together, it's got a bit of the barbecue house, blues house to it. You know what I mean? They're going to be chopping and diving, dipping and ducking, and it's a friendly battle. He seems like a fairly competitive guy, and he knows Ammons going way back to playing with Dexter Gordon in Billy Eckstein's band, you know, and the membership of the Eckstein band over the years is pretty outstanding. This is the sensual sound of Sonny Stitt with the Ralph Burns strings. This comes a little bit later, 84-51, and I don't think Creed Taylor's here yet, but most of the guys of this era get a record with strings here and there. Clifford Brown, Parker, it's pretty much par for the course. Here's a part 2 to the Ammons and Stitt Boss Tenors. This is Boss Tenors in orbit, and so don't get confused. There's 2 of them, and Verve is willing to reissue records with different covers, but those are actually 2 different sessions. This, on the other hand, Dizzy Rollins and Stitt, is a reissue of an earlier session I showed you, 84-77. And so that rounds out his period at Verve label. And now another label that he spends a long time at, and he seems to depart for a few years, but then come back, is Argo. And I think Argo was a great fit for Sonny. The whole Chicago grit, the whole Chicago blues scene. I think it just was a real comfortable place for Stitt, and I think probably the stresses and demands being in Chicago were less than they were being in New York at those studios. And again, he's such a lone wolf. He doesn't have a band to think about or loyalty to a lot of people. But this is Burnin'. You see the match there. This is Argo 661. And he actually makes more records at Argo than I recall. This is 629, very early, just called Sonny Stitt. So that's very early in the Argo discography, probably 56, maybe 57, no, probably 56. 683 is Sonny Stitt at the DJ Lounge. And then 697 is Ammons and Stitt playing together again at Argo now. And I think it's just called Dig 'Em. Rearing back Sonny Stitt, now we're at Argo 709. So the switch to the Cadet name is coming soon because of the lawsuit with the British label Argo. Here we are at 730. Move on over. It's a great album cover. It's still under the Argo name, which means that this has to be one of the last ones that has, this will have probably Argo and Cadet releases. This has Nicky Hill on the alto sax, who's a fantastic player Scott Baldwin told me about. But being a Chicago session, it's not surprising that he's there. But I should give this one a listen later because Nicky Hill is a great player that's not often talked about. It's kind of interesting that Stitt alto and tenor, Nicky Hill alto. Interesting. And this is very Argo here. That slap organ in there. Just barroom blues and grill. Probably 1960 or so. Again, you gotta love Sonny Stitt. Cool cover. Move on over. This is 744. And there's a song in here that I think is just outstanding. I've played it quite a bit at my gigs. It just has such a cool vibe to it. It feels so modern. It feels like it could have been recorded the other day. The kick drum is as cool as a click to it. Budos Band, Scooby-Doo. It's just hip, modern Mancini. Like, it's just got elements of a lot of cool spy themes, shucking and jiving. But this is Sonny Stitt with Benny Green, who's the great trombone player who plays the blue note for a long time. And there's Sonny Stitt. Like, the sound is always gorgeous. This is Sonny Stitt with Zoot Sims Interactions. This is later. This is Cadet 760. So that's probably 63. And this is when he's actually come back to Argo after a brief move over to Atlantic and Impulse for a brief moment. This is Sonny Stitt and Bunky Green, Soul in the Night. If you don't know Bunky Green, that's another treat from Argo label. Scott Baldwin, thank you very much. And this Ammons and Stitt is actually, I think, a reissue of the earlier Ammons and Stitt record. So now Atlantic also does, probably 1960, 3 records that I know of with Sonny Stitt. And it's just a broad discography to get your hands around. He certainly moves around a lot. This, of course, Coltrane Sound, I think it is called, has a similar album cover. Milt Jackson has one, and there's a 4th one as well. Charles Mingus, Playing at Noon, all have the same artist doing this kind of painting of some sort. Here he's playing with John Lewis, Jim Hall, Richard Davis, and Connie Kay. So a lot of Atlantic musicians at this point. Does it show the year? No, I wish they'd show the years more often. But 1418, it's probably 61, 62 in there where this is coming out. He also does an album called Sonny Stitt and the Top Brass, where he's playing with the large horn section. Arranged by Tad Dammer, which is pretty cool. And this is Sonny Stitt, Deuces Wild, introducing Robin Kenyatta. It's a bit of a weirder record. It's got the bagpipes of Rufus Harley on it. Therefore, it's in a different sequence than regular Atlantic. But it's something you see once in a while, and you grab it. So like I said, he also goes to Impulse, where he makes 2 great records. And this one's with Paul Gonsalves of the Ellington fame. And this one's just Sonny Stitt now. These records aren't that tough to come by. Beautiful stuff there. So you can see these guys really move around a lot. And a lot of the great players end up spending stints at most of the great labels. This is with Hank Jones, Al Lucas, and Ozzie Johnson. That's pretty much an all-star affair. A huge Hank Jones guy, as I've said before. The record with Gonsalves is also nice. And then Riverside on Jazzland puts out this number 71 of the Jazzland series, which is going to put this pretty late in the Jazzland sequence, which means it might even be after Riverside ceases to exist. This is something they could have been putting out exactly when Jazzland, where Jazzland was when Riverside ceased to be. I'm not as sure as I am with the Riverside. You can kind of tell with the Riverside 400 sequence when the label folds, and then the titles they start kind of putting out after that. It's kind of pretty clear. With Jazzland, I don't know nearly as well. It's tough to find information on Jazzland. But this is with Paul Whedon, Don Patterson, and Billy James. It's a great record, actually. Really smokes. And then that leads us to his return to Prestige, 72-97. And so he left Prestige in 71-30, even though those records were really much before that. But here we are at the end of the 7200 sequence. So about 300 records into the Prestige 7000 series. He's playing with Jack McDuff. And those who know what I've talked about Prestige, by 72-97, Prestige 7000 series is pretty much just soul jazz. It's grooving, it's smooth, it's danceable, it's jukebox 45able, it's played in white neighborhoods, it's played in black neighborhoods and bars. Prestige 7200 through 7500, it's just a lot of great interchangeable barroom jazz. It's going to feel fun and feel great. And he runs out the 70s at Prestige. Sorry, the 60s, my fault. This is Primitivo Soul, 7302. This is Sonny Stitt, with Don Patterson, Shangri-La. Don Patterson, of course, was another great organ player on the Prestige label. This is Sonny Stitt with Booker Ervin and Don Patterson. And Booker Ervin does some stuff that's much more soul than the book series, which was much more kind of, I don't want to say out, but it had edges for a label that didn't have a lot of edges at this point. Patterson's People, Don Patterson with Sonny Stitt and Booker Ervin. So not the same record, but the same guys. Sonny Stitt, Nightcrawler with Don Patterson. So you see he's playing with Patterson quite a lot. This Powell record, 74-59, with Benny Green, Kirk Weixley, Herman Wright, and Roy Brooks. Don Patterson with Sonny Stitt, The Boss Men with Billy James. And this is Soul Electricity, 76-35. And that's where my Sonny Stitt discography ends. Right there, we're about 1970. And he doesn't end. He continues to record into the 70s. He makes a record coming up, I believe, on Cobblestone. That's actually considered one of his best. A record I want to buy when I'm buying records again. He records, I believe, into the 80s. And then he gets cancer and passes. But you gotta have some love for Sonny Stitt. He's a good bargain in the world of jazz. He plays with all the fire of any of the greats out there, alto and tenor, and his career arc is just really enjoyable. From the lovely feel of the Roost stuff to the bluesy groove with these great musicians at the Norman Granz Verve stuff to the barroom gut blues that happens at Argo, and then he goes back to the soul jazz thing at Prestige. And then his early Prestige stuff is that great bebop. So there's really a long following of the arc of jazz in Sonny Stitt's career. You can really follow what's happening in most of the movies. He stays current and stays with what's happening throughout the years, and yet no one's saying how innovative he is. Miles kind of followed the trends and the currents, but because he sold well and he feels to be at the forefront, people are like, oh, he was so current, he was so innovative. But Stitt is there in almost every innovation in jazz. He dabbles in everything, and just a great player, and I think he deserves more love than he gets. So check out your Sonny Stitt. I appreciate you all. Be safe, and we'll talk soon. Have a good night.